Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Professor Michael Roberto, who's at Bryant University. He was formerly at Harvard Business School. He's written a number of great books. A little while back, he wrote Know What You Don't Know, and he just re-released a fabulous book called Why Great Leaders Don't Take Yes for an Answer. Mike, a pleasure to have you.
Great to be with you, Doug.
So let's talk about know what you don't know, because I find in my day job as a financial advisor that clients often either don't know or they don't know what they don't know, and of course that creates a big problem. Your book talks a lot about businesses, and you do a lot of study there, but do the same principles apply when people are simply handling their own money?
Absolutely. The concept behind the book is the notion that often risks and problems remain hidden in organizations for a variety of reasons. Senior leaders often don't understand where the hidden risks are. I like to say bad news is not like cream. It doesn't rise to the top. And so it's about how to sort of surface hidden risks. And I think and some of the same reasons that apply to large organizations just also apply to someone in their own, managing their own finances. There are certain blinders that we have that cause us to, downplay certain risks. And as a result, they can be really problematic. For example, just as a simple one, psychologists have shown that we are subject to something called the confirmation bias, which means we tend to look for information or focus on information that confirms what we already believe, and we discount information that contradicts our pre-existing positions or views. And that certainly affects us as we're investing, as we're thinking about our finances. If we have a belief about a certain stock or about a certain set of equities or bonds, whatever it might be that we're interested in, markets we're interested in, we might be gathering information and focusing on data that confirms our, optimistic view, and we might be discounting risks because they contradict our position, our existing beliefs. It's a real problem. So I think the same issues do apply.
Okay, so you're talking about a lot of the issues that behavioral finance professors talk about. We've, in fact, had the opportunity here on the Goldstein on Gelt show to talk to a number of them, anywhere from Dan Ariely to Dan Kahneman, who looked at such issues. You raise confirmation bias, which is interesting. One of the issues that we've spoken a lot about is loss aversion, that people just hate to admit a loss. Have you found that also across the spectrum of what you've studied?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, that's, of course, related to something that I spent a lot of time studying, which is called the sunk cost trap. The idea that if you've invested a lot of time, money, or other resources in an endeavor, and those investments are not recoverable, right, that we, in those kinds of situations, we have a hard time cutting our losses. We feel like we don't want to waste the investment we've already made. But it's worse than that, of course, right? Not only do we not cut our losses, but we tend to throw good money after bad.
Right.
And we double down. And that can be very problematic. Now, I studied that not in the context of investments so much as I have studied it in the context of the kinds of projects that companies engage in, the acquisitions they make, and other things within a company. But it certainly applies in our investing behavior a great deal as well.
Other than hiring you as a consultant to help realize these problems, how can normal people not let themselves be affected by any of these problems or some of these problems?
Well, here's the challenge, right? Some of these kinds of, for example, some of the biases we're talking about, they're embedded in human nature. So even just being aware of them doesn't always protect ourselves from these biases. I'm a big advocate for that's where, the people around you are so important. That's where having, in the case of an organization, I talk about, how you build your team and how you make sure that you build a team where people feel safe speaking up, where you can have constructive debate is so crucial so that you can, in fact, be stronger as a unit than you are as individuals in your decision making. If you're an individual and you're out there investing, you don't have a team necessarily, but you can have a sounding board, a devil's advocate, someone who can, make the opposite case and sort of serve as that check and balance for you. And I think everybody when they're talking about high stakes decisions, whether it's you're investing or whether you're a CEO deciding on an acquisition, you should have that sounding board, that devil's advocate in that process, because they can be an important check and balance, and they can really help you think much more critically and thoughtfully about an issue, and they can help you get around those blinders.
That's funny how you describe it in those terms. I get from time to time when I'm working with, let's say, a couple, the husband calls me before, half hour before the meeting, and he says, Doug, listen, when we sit down together to go over our financial plan, it's important that you point out how my wife is overspending, and since you're on the outside, you can mention this. And then what inevitably happens is when we actually sit down and go through all the details, turns out the wife is perfectly fine as the husband who has no clue how to handle money, which I was going to kick out. He wants me to be his yes man, which of course reminds me of the title of your book. We're talking to Professor Mike Roberto at Bryant University. He's written a number of fabulous books. In fact, one of them is called Why Great Leaders Don't Take Yes for an Answer. And, it's funny, I'm thinking about what we're saying is when this husband tells me, hey, Doug, just say it this way. Of course, I'm never going to say it that way if it's not true. It creates a problem for people because when someone asks you enough times, can you do it this way? Can you do it this way? Most workers, I would think, would say, fine, or yes. You've identified leaders or leadership qualities where people don't do that?
That's right. I'm a big believer that this is a major problem. It is pervasive. I love the quote from Executive Barry Rand. He said, if you have a yes man working for you, one of you is redundant. But my argument is that, in fact, in most situations, it's not that CEOs are going out and hiring people who have no backbone. They're not going out and screening for sycophants. What's happening is they're hiring perfectly normal people and then creating a climate or environment through their leadership style where people feel uncomfortable expressing dissent. And so they become yes men or yes women in those cases. So what I did is try to look for what are the kinds of techniques you can use to protect against that. How do you create a safer environment? And I lead the new edition of my book with a story about Alan Mulally, who is the CEO of Ford Motor Company. As you know, he's led a tremendous turnaround at Ford, avoided a taxpayer bailout, returned Ford to profitability, and they've been profitable since 2009. And if you look at that, there's a great story, a tremendous story about his early days at Ford. The company had lost $15 billion in the year. He joined at the end of a year in which they had lost $15 billion. He put in place this business plan review process where the senior team would get together on Thursdays, and they would go through and self-report on their progress on key initiatives that were part of the strategic plan. And he asked them to color code their initiatives, green, yellow, or red, based on how well things were going. And he says, it's amazing, lost $15 billion, there were no reds. And he told the team this. And he said, it's got to be okay for us to, say there's a project that's red. And a few weeks later, finally, one of his senior executives had the guts to put up a red. And Mulally says the room got silent. Everyone was wondering, what's going to happen. And Mulally got up and clapped. And the team was stunned. And he said, we can't solve the problems if we don't know where they are. And you have to tell me the truth. I need to know that. And I'm not going to fire you at the first sign of a problem. You have to understand that. This is about fixing Ford, and we're a team. And, obviously if the same problems keep arising, then we have an issue. But we're not going to get to the blame game right off the bat. We're going to fix the problem. And he said that was amazing is not only did we fix that problem, that first red project, but the next week he said all of the charts became a rainbow. In other words, suddenly people said, oh, okay, I can fess up and talk more candidly. So to me, that's a great story, just one instance of the kind of thing leaders can do to start to change that climate around yes men.
That's a great story. Was that something you think that people learn that skill, or is there a real role for intuition and observation when you're the leader of a company?
You certainly can learn. I hope you can learn. That's part of what I do is try to help people learn some of those skills and techniques. But there is certainly a role for intuition. And sometimes when people think about intuition, they think about it as simply gut instinct. But, there's been a lot of scholarship on intuition and shows that it really is more than just this ephemeral thing that we can't explain. In fact, we can explain it to some extent. It's a pattern recognition ability based on deep expertise in a field. And so I think there are some leaders who start to see patterns. They're better at recognizing, I'm missing something here. And that can come in a variety of forms, but they start to read signals that, maybe not everybody's on board here, or maybe I am missing something here. And I think so, but it also can be learned. I think there are techniques you can use that can also help you when you're facing a situation where the team isn't really willing to be candid.
I think that power of pattern recognition is huge. I had on the show a while back world chess champion Susan Polgar, who had set the Guinness Book of World Records at one point for playing the most simultaneous games of chess. It was something like 300 or 400, of which she won like 300 or 400. And they said, how could you play so many games one at a time? And she said, I just looked at the board and I was able to recognize what was going on, whereas a player who's not great, let's say me, I actually have to sort of look at each piece and figure out what the situation is, as opposed to recognizing the pattern as a whole. But in my expertise, if I look at a client statement, it'll take me 1 minute to see, as opposed to, I guess, some people have to spend an hour reviewing their investments.
Right, and so the only danger there with that pattern recognition is what can happen to us is sometimes we can fall victim to the idea that we reason by analogy. This is analogous to something I've seen before, but here's again one of those traps. Sometimes we focus too much on the similarities between a situation and something we've seen in the past, and we overlook a key difference. And so we decide to repeat something we've done in the past when, in fact, the situation is slightly different. So you have to be on the lookout for that. But generally speaking, pattern recognition is a powerful thing, and you see experts, whether it's in chess or in business or in finance, who do. They can see the pattern without having to go through all the steps that a novice would have to go through to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. It's funny also, if I talk to a couple about investing in stocks, and I say, well, last time it didn't work out well. I say, well, what do you mean? They say, well, we once bought a stock and we lost money. So that's the pattern that they're copying, and that is a huge mistake. Yeah.
Right. Reasoning from a sample of one, but yeah.
I think that's how many people make their decisions. We've been talking to Professor Mike Roberto at Bryant University. He's written a number of great books, Why Great Leaders Don't Take Yes for an Answer and Know What You Don't Know, both of which are critical for people in many fields. Mike, we're just about out of time, but tell me in the last few seconds, how can people follow your work?
So they're welcome to visit my blog, where I blog typically on each weekday about interesting new management research, as well as around lessons from key issues in the headlines in business. That blog is at michael-roberto.blogspot.com. Or they can visit thegreatcourses.com, where I've got a couple of courses on leadership and decision-making that folks can buy in audio form, and they can listen while they're commuting to work or the like, or there's also a video form they can buy if they wish to watch the course as well. So that's thegreatcourses.com.
Okay, and we'll put up links to both those at the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Mike Roberto, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.